Hey guys, and welcome back to my little winter fishing series. So if you watched my last video, I finished it up by talking about a tip and a tactic that I like to do. If you've never seen my video on how to tie the knot right Albright or my version of the Albright, I'm about to show you how to do it. But this isn't a knot tying video, it's a video to show you how I tie the knot. Now normally what I do is I just overlap the leader enough to get the knot tied. What I'm going to do in this instance is I'm going to leave about 2 foot there, okay, 1.5 feet. And the way you tie the Albright is you just take your braided line, you double your leader material over, and you go through the knot, okay? Once you come through, I like to tie this knot by feel. So I've learned how to just use my fingers to just wrap the line around and around, just like that, okay? Depending on the dissimilarities in the diameter of the line, depends on how many times I'm going to wrap it. In this case, the diameters are pretty close, so I'm going to go with 12, 13 wraps. I always do a little bit more than 10. If your braided line is really thin and your leader is really thick, you might need to double that. You might need to go to 20 or maybe even 25 wraps. Once you've got the line through there, you just take the braided line, your running line, not your leader, you go back through that loop in the opposite direction. What I like to do then is line that stuff up, and I like to wet it. Once I wet it, I like to pull back on it to make sure that none of those wraps overlap each other, and then simply slide it down. Once you slide it down, you're ready to lock the knot. But what I like to do is hold both pieces of the tag in, or the leader material, hold the main running line and grab that tag and pull it as tight as I can get it. What that does is it really tightens those wraps up, and it also tightens that outer line that goes around the outside and cleans it up. That right there is your standard Albright knot. The reason I call it the knot right Albright is I take it one step further and I take my braided tag in and I do 3 half hitches, okay? I'm gonna do 3 half hitches around my main running line, and this is a lot easier if you got your rod in your armpit and you're holding your PFD or sitting in the kayak. But for demonstration purposes, I just like to do 3 half hitches. Now, once I do that, I just bend it over my finger right there, and then I'm gonna take my line clippers, and I'm going to come out about 1/4 inch, and I'm going to cut that off. After I cut it off, I'm going to go right up against it, and I'm going to skin that, okay? Once I skin that, what that does, now it's a little more relevant in the summertime when I make that little tuft right there. But if I'm fishing a river or if I'm fishing shallow water, and I do fish shallow a lot in the winter, when you cast that line out, and I talked about in my last video, laying the line on the water, that little tuft just lays on the surface of the water, and it acts like a strike indicator. Especially in situations where I clip off the tag end, which I'm not going to do in this video because I'm showing you guys how to rig up a rig that I use very effectively for a lot of different things. So this is normally your cutoff, your tag end, the piece that you throw away. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push that to the side, and I'm going to grab the main line of the leader, and I'm going to show you what I was talking about in that last video. If you didn't watch that last video, the link is in the description box, so be sure to go check that out. So I'm just going to tie this tube onto the bottom, okay? Once I tie this tube onto the bottom and I get it nice and secured, we will go on to the point that I'm trying to illustrate here. If you're not the kind of person that salivates on all your knots, you're not tying knots right. So one of the ways that I learned, or I got the name, or earned the name, or whatever the heck you want to call it, knot right, is tying knots really well. You know, I pride myself on tying knots really well. I sit at the house and practice them, and I've been doing it for a long time, so you should do the same thing. I don't think if you've never got your wife to complain about how many pieces of scrap fishing line are laying around the recliner of the living room, I don't think you're trying hard enough as a fisherman. Or maybe I'm just a crappy husband. You decide. So once you got that lure tied on, this is what most people fish. And they're done. They tie the line on, they tie the leader material on. The thickness is determined on what you're fishing, rocks, treetops, structure cover, the clarity of the water, blah, blah, blah. Okay, we're not talking about this video, but just for the sake of argument, this is 20-pound fluorocarbon. So what I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to take this, and I'm going to go out about, 12 to 18 inches in this case. I made it just long enough to accomplish what I wanted to accomplish. And then I'm going to tie on another hook. Okay, once I tie on that other hook, you've got a lot of options right here. And actually, the hook that you tie on really depends on what you're going to tie. And in this case, I'm going to demonstrate a couple of different setups for you. And this is just a 3/0 big mouth tube hook from Mustad. One of my favorite hooks for a lot of things, but especially for soft plastics. So now you've got this tag in that would normally be a throwaway, okay? And got to make sure that you don't do that. Make sure that that braided line doesn't go through the gap. Kind of flip that over right yonder and bring that hook to the other side. And then when you cast this thing, you almost got to lob it, okay? That might even be a little bit long, but you only know that by throwing it. You only know when you throw. So what I like to do is take this extra hook right here and find a particular type of lure. In this case, I'm going to grab a fluke, but I'm going to show you a couple of other options that you can use with this setup. So this is one of the KVD's perfect plastic flukes. I'm going to rig it weightless by just coming in through the nose right here. Boom, just like that. Pop it out at the transition. Run this joker up on there. And you know I said in the last video that you could do this as a drop shot rig, but let me show you what I'm doing, why I'm doing it, and how I'm doing it, okay? So now I got this thing rigged, you know, weedless, clean, weightless. So you take this rig, and when you cast it, when I said in the last video that I very rarely do a sling cast, I do more of a lob cast, this is part of the reason, because I fish this setup a lot. And what I like to do is I like to pitch this bait out, okay? What we're going to do is we're going to switch to a different camera view so you can see the lure. It's just on the floor of the shop, but you got your weight on the bottom. And if you notice, that fluke is dangling from the leader material. Now, what's cool about that is when that weight hits the bottom with that tube, I'm fishing that tube. And then when I raise my rod tip up, I'm fishing that fluke. Now, the main reason that I'm not just tying this directly to the line like a drop shot is I want this to be able to articulate. I want when that lure hits the bottom, I want this thing to flutter down. But more importantly, when I got this thing on the bottom, okay, and I twitch that line, that fluke darts up and then falls back down, and darts up and falls back down. So in the beginning of winter and even towards the late part of winter, you get a lot of shad die-offs. And when you get those shad die-offs, you don't know, are they eating the crawfish or are they eating the shad? You know what? Fish them both. And sometimes I'll make this leader as short as this much, and I'll make this one as short as about 6 inches. So you just have to play with it and vary it up. But if I'm fishing a treetop, a laydown, a bluff wall, or a bank, you take that setup right there, you just lob cast it out, let that lure fall to the bottom, and then when you've got this setup right here, you just twitch it, and then you drop it and let that fluke articulate down to the bottom. And then sometimes I just let them both lay on the bottom and just drag them, twitch, twitch, just like that. And man, I'm going to tell you, more often than not, when I can see the fish, I'll drag the first bait past it, okay? And the fish don't quite talk itself into it. The fish don't quite talk herself into gobbling it up. But there's just something about the fact that she's like, nah, and then along comes another option just a second later. So, you know, I don't know whether it's willpower, I don't know whether it's psychological, but that second lure coming by, in a lot of cases, just does the damage. Now, this setup right here is pretty versatile. You know, you can change this out to like a robo worm and use it like a drop shot. In fact, let me just show you exactly what I do here, because I do this probably as much, if not more, than any other configuration that I use. I'll use a 1/2 ounce jig on the bottom and a Cinco on the top, what I refer to as the jig and twig, or I'll use the tube on the bottom, and then instead of a fluke, I'll substitute in my drop shot worm, which I dropped my drop shot worm, so hold on a second. But I don't use it on a drop shot hook, and the reason that I don't is I don't want to hang up, okay? I don't want to hang up non-stop. So I'll even use this drop shot worm that looks like a little dying minnow or a shad, and I'll rig this joker straight up on a big mouth tube hook or a small, I might even go down a size. I might go to a 2/0, but just for illustration purposes, I'm going to stick with what I got, because I would fish this just like this. You know, especially if I'm out there in changing conditions, I bring a fish up and it's shaking out little minnows and things like that. There is nothing wrong with fishing that setup right there. And the smaller the bait and the more lively it is, the more of that darting and twitching that you get. And sometimes there's just something about that little bit smaller bait in the wintertime that they just gobble it up. So that 1-2 punch right there, guys, is unfreaking believable for winter fishing. There's also something, I think, psychologically for me, and maybe for most anglers, that when you pitch that bait out and you wanna fish this one slow, okay? There's something psychological about the ability to say in your mind, yeah, I'm letting this one sit dead stick, but that other one's moving, okay? Or every time I move this, I'm kicking it along, that one's getting a lot more action. But for me, there's just something psychologically fulfilling about when I pitch that bait out there, and like I've talked about in the past, when I use that finger roll, that finger twitch or the finger drag technique, that I just twitch that and it brings that, if you see that worm, okay, we'll do a cutaway to the worm. When I just do that little finger twitch right there, it really brings that worm. And now if that, actually, let me pitch this out to where the tube will catch on the edge, and then I'll be able to really show you how this thing works. So I get that tube to catch on the edge of that concrete right there, just like that. And man, when I do that finger twitch, it just really brings that worm. See that? It just really brings that worm to life. And that's what'll happen if your tube bumps up against a rock edge or a rock ledge or something along those lines. But what I'm gonna do real quick is I'm gonna make one adjustment in this video. If you look at the way that that's set up and in your mind's eye, you visualize what's happening, you may say to yourself, God, I want that drop shot set up to be more of what I'm focusing on. If you start catching more fish on that, one quick adjustment that you can make is just bring that lure back in, okay? You're gonna take this little tag in right here. I always start long because if I don't, I gotta retie the entire setup to make it happen. But I just bite that off right there. 10 out of 10 dentists will tell you not to bite fishing line. I'm not a dentist, and I get free dental. Well, pretty free dental for, you know, retiring from the military. But anyway, that's a side public service announcement. We'll just keep going with the tip here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna shorten that leader, you know, somewhat. And I like to shorten it incrementally until I find what I want, like I said, so I don't have to retie the whole apparatus. But I'm gonna pull that down. I'm gonna re-rig it. And just with that little adjustment, I'm gonna pitch this back out there and I'm gonna show you the difference, okay? So just imagine that this is on the bottom. Okay, I'm gonna pitch my tube out there. Whoa, got to put my finger. I'm gonna pitch this tube out there. I'm gonna catch it on that edge right there, boom. Just look how much more action there is with that thing up off the bottom. Now imagine that being in the water, the return on investment is crazy. And so a lot of times what I like to do is just hop it, okay? And you notice that in this hop, okay, we're gonna cut to this when I say it, but when I hop this, notice how much that worm moved, but how little the tube moved. So I'm just doing a little hop. And that thing's obviously gonna fall a lot slower because it's gonna be in the water, so it's gonna sit there like a dying shad and fall to the bottom. And I can't tell you how many times I've hooked this one and been bringing a fish to the boat and another one came up and hit that, especially if they're a little bit closer to each other. So again, I like to tie both leaders long first, and then I'll trim it down to get it kind of in that sweet spot. There's a lot of different variations that you can do of this. You can do it with a jig. You can do it with a Texas rig plastic on the bottom like we talked about before. And something else that I do, and I don't even talk about this a lot, but I'm gonna go ahead and share it right now because I'm gonna foreshadow a trick, you know, for in the future, is I like to use wrecking ball style fishing where I pitch a weight up that I'm punching with, and I like to punch it through, and I use that same setup where I use that tag in. And a lot of times you'll have a bass that when that bait punches through real fast, they don't see it. You know how you gotta yo-yo your bait back up and pop the bottom of the mat and then they hit it? Well, a lot of times what you can do with a punch rig is you can throw it out and punch it through the mat, and it makes a big enough hole that a little drop shot worm or a shad bait or a Yamamoto Seiko or a speed crawl or something like that can be on that trailer. I like to make it about 4 inches long, okay? When that punch weight goes through, it breaks through, that light comes through, then that fish looks up, but your bait's already out of the strike zone. That's why a lot of times when you raise that bait up and pop the bottom of the mat, that's when they hit it. But what you can do is you can have that bait on the bottom, figure out what your depth is, tie your leader length that, and have that thing right in the middle of the water column. So it's right there, they see it, it's sitting there, nah, there's sunlight coming through. It's like the avoid the noid on the old Domino's commercials. I will find out how old you are if you got that, because you gotta be at least my age to know what I'm talking about. But that thing's just like, nah, just kinda right there, just irritating, and then fish can't stand it. But what I always do in that scenario is I set the hook on that first fish and I bring it up through the mat, okay? And I lay it on the mat because that's generally a 3 or 4 pounder, that first one that hit it. And I don't know how many times I've kind of gave that line back a little bit and that jig or that punch bait is swinging in that hole and another one, usually bigger, smashes it and I drag it up on the mat Now I got a 1-2 punch. Now, I am going to apologize for the years that I've been doing television and video that I have not did more punching and flipping videos. And I'm gonna tell you why, and I'm gonna say that I will rectify that this year as soon as I let this truck next door go by and I take one sip of my coffee, because I am coffee driven and I haven't had enough today. So hold on just a second. All right, so here's the deal. I don't really like flipping and pitching and punching on video, but I love it for just fun fishing. It's just something about going like this and popping it and catch a fish, okay? It just, to me, doesn't make the most exciting video. So what I'll do is I'll leave it to you guys, okay? And then I'm gonna end this video, and we'll be back with another winter fishing video in a couple of days. And then once that video comes out, I'll link it up in the description box. The question is, do you enjoy watching very effective techniques and learning how to do them if they're not that exciting? And if you do, comment in the comment section below, and I'll start doing more of it. Now, if I'm gonna win a tournament, if I'm gonna fish and just to catch fish and get a fish picture, I'm gonna flip and pitch and punch, you know, until the cows come home. But for me, it's just boring to do, and it's slow and tedious. It produces great results. It's very hard for somebody as big as me to have a camera behind me to set the hook without the pole wobbling and I'm standing up. And so, you know, I've always just kind of avoided it. But we're coming up on 10 years on TV, and KBF is 10 years old this year. So the question is, do you want to see results-driven fishing that may not be that entertaining? And I'll try to find a balance between the two. Throw some humor in there, a little Mary Poppins effect, a little spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. So answer that question for me. And then we're going to leave this video by saying, do me a favor, if you haven't thought about doing so yet, join Kayak Bass Fishing, support the channel, support what we're doing here to grow the community. The link is in the description box, and you know, come on back where I'll tell you about another favorite winter fishing technique, which is to use a big old spoon and spoon feed them. So we'll talk about how to fish these and a few tricks and modifications and in the next video. Until then, y'all subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Smash that thumbs up video if you're still here at the end, and stay tuned in the next couple of videos where I flash my subscriber secret giveaway code word, which is you know, it's a discount code that you can use in the KBF store, and it's gonna, you know, fortune is going to favor the quick responder. I'll just leave it at that. I'll see you guys next time.